My dad didn't look up from his plate when he told me he'd given away the only thing I had left of my grandmother. We were sitting at the kitchen table on a Sunday evening, the same table where I'd eaten 10,000 meals, done homework, and learned to make myself small. The smell of pot roast was in the air. Football was on TV in the other room, and my brother was leaning back in his chair like he owned every square inch of the house, which apparently he was starting to. My dad set down his fork, wiped his mouth, and said it like he was telling me the weather had changed. "We moved the money, Claire. The account your grandmother left you. We had to. Your brother needed it more right now." I looked at him. I waited for the laugh. For the "just kidding, sweetheart." It didn't come. My mom reached over and patted my brother's arm like he just survived something. He gave me a sideways smile. Not mean exactly, just unbothered. That was almost worse. He wasn't gloating. He just genuinely didn't think it was a big deal. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. 29 years of being the tough one in this family had trained me not to make scenes. The word tough was their favorite word for me. Claire is tough. Claire can handle it. Claire doesn't need as much. It was the thing they said instead of paying attention. I sat there with a fork in my hand and $28,000 less than I'd had that morning, and I looked across the table at the man sitting next to me. Daniel hadn't moved. He was very still, the way still water looks calm before you realize how deep it runs. His jaw was tight. His eyes were fixed on my father with an expression I hadn't seen on him before. My family thought he was a nice enough guy. A little quiet, a blue-collar type in a faded work jacket who drove a truck with a cracked windshield and never ordered the expensive thing on the menu. My mom had told her sister he was sweet but simple. My dad had asked him once early on what he did for work, and when Daniel said construction, my dad had nodded the way you nod at a child's drawing and moved on. They had no idea what was about to happen. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I grew up in a house in suburban Ohio where love was not divided equally. I didn't understand that as a child. Children don't come with the language for it. I just knew that something in the air was always tilted, always leaning in one direction, and that direction was never mine. My brother was 3 years younger than me, and from the moment he came home from the hospital, the whole house rearranged itself around him. He cried louder. He needed more. My parents treated his needs like emergencies and mine like suggestions. I remember being 7 years old and falling off my bike, scraping both palms raw on the driveway. I walked inside bleeding, and my mom looked up from the couch where she was watching my brother try to build a block tower and said, "You're tough. You're fine. Get a Band-Aid from the bathroom." She didn't get up. I got my own Band-Aid. I always got my own Band-Aid. By the time I was in high school, I had absorbed the lesson completely. Don't ask. Don't need. Don't take up space. My brother asked for things constantly. Tutors, new sneakers, gas money, extensions on family rules. And my parents almost always said yes, because he's going through a phase or he just needs a little extra support right now, or simply because he kept asking until they gave in, and I had stopped asking at all. When I got into the state university on partial scholarship, my dad said, "Great, just figure out the loans." When my brother dropped out of community college 2 semesters in, my parents paid off his tuition balance and bought him a car so he could find himself. He spent a year finding himself mostly on the couch. I worked 2 jobs through college. I graduated. I got a job as a project coordinator at a mid-sized firm downtown. I paid my rent, my student loans, my car insurance, my everything on my own for years without ever once calling home to ask for help. Not because I didn't need it, but because I already knew the answer. The only financial safety net I had ever had was my grandmother's account. She'd set it aside for me specifically, told my dad to keep it in a joint savings account he managed and not touch it. She said it was for my future, for a home, for stability. She said, and I remember this because she looked right at me when she said it, every woman should have something that's hers alone. She died when I was 24. The money stayed in the account. I checked it occasionally. It was there, growing slowly with interest. $28,000. Not a fortune. Enough for a down payment on a small house in the right neighborhood, enough to stop renting, enough to build something. I never touched it because I was waiting until I was ready. until I had the rest of the pieces in place. It felt like a promise she made me, and I kept my end by leaving it alone. I met Daniel in October of my 28th year at the most unglamorous possible place, a city zoning board meeting in a drafty community center off Route 9. I was there because my apartment building's landlord was trying to push through a variance that would have turned the parking lot into a second building, and I was annoyed enough to show up and say something. Daniel was there because, I found out later, a project his company had bid on depended on the outcome. He was sitting 2 chairs down from me in the back row in a worn canvas jacket, flipping through a packet of zoning documents like he'd read 100 of them. He had dark hair that needed a cut and hands that looked like they actually worked for a living. And when the meeting got tense and one of the board members started talking in circles, he leaned over to me and said quietly, "They're going to table it." "They always table it." "How do you know?" I whispered back. "Third time I've been to one of these," he said. "They table it. Then they approve it 6 months later when fewer people show up." He was right. They table it. Afterward, we ended up at the same diner because it was cold and neither of us had eaten dinner. We sat in a corner booth and talked for 2 hours about nothing important and everything interesting. He asked real questions. He listened to the answers. He didn't check his phone. When I told him I'd grown up always being the responsible one in my family, he didn't give me the usual response. The breezy, "Oh, that's good though, right?" He just looked at me for a moment and said, "That sounds exhausting." 2 words. That was it. But I felt something in my chest unlock that had been sealed for years. We started seeing each other slowly. He was careful with his words and generous with his time. He drove a beat-up truck and wore the same 3 jackets in rotation and never seemed particularly concerned with impressing anyone. I liked that about him. I was tired of performance. I was tired of people who needed you to know how well they were doing. I didn't tell my family about him for a long time. I knew exactly what would happen. My mom would look at his jacket and make a quiet calculation. My dad would ask about his income and find the answer disappointing. My brother would make some joke about the truck, and if any of them decided they didn't like him, they'd find ways to chip at it until I second-guessed myself. I had watched them do it to my college roommate who I'd brought home once. I wasn't doing that again, so I kept Daniel to myself for 8 months. He understood, more than I expected him to. "Take your time," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." Then one Saturday morning, I found out who he actually was. I was at his apartment, a clean, modest place with IKEA furniture and good coffee. While he was out running, I was looking for a phone charger and opened the wrong kitchen drawer. Inside was a folder, the kind with a plastic sleeve on the front. A business proposal. The header read, "Harlow Construction Group, Q4 Acquisition Summary." I knew that name. Everyone in our county knew that name. Harlow Construction had built the new hospital wing, the mixed-use development downtown, 3 subdivisions in the past 4 years. They had trucks everywhere. Their logo was on signs all over the city. I picked up the folder. I read the first page. Principal and founder, Daniel Harlow. I was still holding it when he came back. He saw my face and stopped in the doorway. We had the conversation. He explained everything, that he'd learned early that money changed how people treated you, that he'd been taken advantage of before by people who wanted his business connections or his network, that he'd started introducing himself simply, without the last name, without the context, because he wanted to know someone before they knew his balance sheet. When he met me, he said, I was so clearly not interested in any of that. I was there arguing about a parking lot over a zoning variance. I was funny and direct and a little bit fierce and completely uninterested in status. He'd been afraid that if he told me earlier, I'd treat him differently. Or leave. I thought about the past 8 months, the walks, the terrible diner coffee, the way he'd sat with me on my apartment floor when I had a bad week and just been present without trying to fix anything. It's still you, I said finally. It's still me, he said. I wasn't angry. I was a little shaken. But mostly I understood in a way that surprised me because I had spent my whole life being seen as something smaller than I was too. He asked me to marry him 4 months later in the kitchen of my apartment with a ring he told me he'd chosen himself and had been carrying around for 6 weeks waiting for the right moment. I said yes. We decided to keep his business life quiet a little longer. He had a feeling about my family. I told him enough, and he wanted to see who they really were first. Let them think what they want to think, he said. People show you exactly who they are when they're not trying to impress anyone. We went to dinner at my parents' house to share the engagement news. It went the way I expected. My mom was polite but kept looking at Daniel's jacket. My dad shook his hand firmly and then asked, in that tone designed to seem casual, "So what are you building these days?" Daniel said he was working on a commercial project downtown. My dad nodded without interest and changed the subject to my brother, who had apparently just come up with a new business idea. My brother was 26, living at home, and it was his fourth business idea in 3 years. The first was a reselling thing that lasted 2 months. The second was a food truck concept he never launched. The third was a gym supplements brand. This one was a real estate investment platform that he had described to my parents with a lot of confidence and very little detail. My parents were glowing. "He's really onto something this time," my mom told me. "He just needs some startup capital to get off the ground. We're so proud of him." I smiled and said the right things and drove home and told Daniel how tired I was. 3 weeks later, my dad called and asked me to come to Sunday dinner. "Just family," he said. Something in his voice was different, too measured, too careful. I knew that voice. It was the voice he used when he was about to tell me something he knew I wasn't going to like, but had already decided. We drove out together, Daniel and I. I held his hand the whole way. When we walked in, my brother was already at the table, relaxed as always, scrolling his phone. My mom was setting out plates with the cheerful efficiency of someone who has rehearsed a difficult conversation and decided to treat it like a normal one. We sat down. My dad poured himself a drink. "Claire," he said, and looked at me across the table in that way. That flat, managerial look. "We need to talk about the savings account." Everything in me went cold. "What about it?" I said, not a question. "We had to move the funds," he said. "Your brother's venture needs capital to launch. We're talking real potential here. This is a ground floor opportunity and the timing is critical. He needs to move fast or he'll miss the window." I stared at him. "Your grandmother left that money for me," I said. "She left it in an account we manage," my dad said. "She wanted the family to be taken care of. Your brother is family. She said it was for me. She was specific. You were both there. Claire." My mom set a serving dish down with a little too much force. "Don't be like this. You have a good job. You're about to get married to," she glanced at Daniel, "someone. You're fine. You've always been able to figure things out on your own. That's your gift. Your brother doesn't have that same. He needs more support. He always has. Tough." They didn't say the word this time, but it was there, hanging in the air. "You're tough, Claire. You're fine. You don't need it." "It was $28,000, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. "That was for a house. I have been waiting to use that for a down payment. That was the plan." "Plans change," my dad said. "You can save up again. You're young. You're capable." He said capable like it was a compliment. Like calling me capable meant he was off the hook for what he'd done. "Your brother has a real window here. This is an investment in the family's future." My brother finally looked up from his phone. "I really do think this is going to be something, Claire," he said, in the tone of a person who has never had to fight for a single thing in their life. "I'll pay you back once we get traction." I felt the familiar shutdown beginning, the old training kicking in, telling me not to cause a scene, to be fine, to let it go, to absorb it the way I always absorbed everything. 29 years of practice. But then the chair beside me moved. Daniel stood up. He was quiet about it. That was the thing about Daniel. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. When he stood, the energy in the room shifted the way it does before weather changes. My dad stopped talking. My brother sat up straight without knowing why. "I'm sorry," Daniel said. His voice was even, completely controlled. "I just want to make sure I understand. You took money from an account that was left specifically for your daughter, by her grandmother, for her future, and you gave it to someone else, without asking her." My dad's expression went rigid. "This is a family matter, son." "She's my fiancé," Daniel said. "That makes it my matter, too." He paused. "And I prefer you didn't call me son." My mom let out a short, nervous laugh. "Daniel, we appreciate that you care, but you don't really understand how our family—" "I understand enough," he said. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He took out his phone, opened something, and placed it face up in the center of the table. My dad looked down at the screen. The color left his face so completely and so fast it was almost startling. My mom leaned forward. Her eyes went wide. My brother craned his neck and then made a sound. Not quite a word, just a sound. The screen showed the Harlow Construction Group homepage. Company overview. Founded by Daniel Harlow. Current projects. Revenue figures from a recent industry profile. I kept this quiet, Daniel said, because I wanted to see how you treated Claire when you thought I had nothing. Now I know. He looked at my dad steadily. The money needs to be back in her account by Friday. Every dollar, plus whatever interest it would have earned. If it's not, I'll have my legal team look at the account's trust documentation, because I'm willing to bet what your mother-in-law put in writing gives Claire grounds you don't want examined. The table was silent. My mom's mouth opened and closed. My dad was still staring at the phone like it might change if he looked at it long enough. My brother had gone completely still. The first time I could remember seeing him without anything to say. Then my mom stood up, and her whole affect changed. The tight politeness dropped away, and something warmer, more urgent rushed in to replace it. But it was the warmth of someone who has suddenly seen the correct answer on a test. "Daniel," she said, coming around the table toward him. "We've been wanting to get to know you better, really. I feel like we got off on the wrong foot. You have to understand, we love Claire so much." "If you loved her," Daniel said, not moving, "you wouldn't have needed me to stand here for that to matter." She stopped. My dad pushed back his chair. His voice had changed too. The flat management tone was gone, replaced with something more careful, more calculating. "Look, Daniel, I'm a businessman myself. I understand positioning. You played that well. But let's be adults about this. The money situation, we can resolve it. These things happen in families." "What things?" Daniel said. My dad blinked. "What things happen in families?" Daniel said. "Because from what Claire has told me, this isn't a thing that happened. This is a pattern. 29 years of her absorbing everything quietly because you taught her that her job was to need less." He picked his phone up off the table. "The money. Friday. Or my attorney calls yours first thing Monday morning." My brother found his voice then. He had straightened up, shifted, and now he was looking at Daniel with the particular expression of someone who has just recalculated an entire situation. "This is wild," he said, with a short laugh meant to seem relaxed. "I had no idea, man. I genuinely thought it was a family account. I didn't know it was specifically set up for Claire. Nobody explained it to me that way." He was looking at Daniel when he said it, not at me. He was explaining himself to Daniel. Something settled in me like a stone dropping through water. I looked at my brother. I looked at my mom, still standing near the table, uncertain where to put her hands. I looked at my dad, who was watching Daniel with the eyes of someone trying to figure out his next move. And I understood, completely and finally, that the revelation of Daniel's success hadn't broken something open. It had simply shown me what had always been true. They hadn't been confused about the money. They had known exactly what they were doing. They had counted on me being too tough, too capable, too trained to quietly absorb it to push back. What changed wasn't their hearts. What changed was the math. I pushed my chair back and stood up. "I want to say something," I said. My voice was low and even. Daniel looked at me. He didn't reach for my hand this time. He waited. He had always been good at waiting. I looked at my dad first. "I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to cry. I just want you to understand something clearly, because I've spent my whole life communicating in ways designed not to inconvenience you, and I'm done with that." My dad opened his mouth. I kept going. "You told me I was capable like it was something you were proud of. But you made me capable by never showing up. You didn't build that strength in me. You left a gap, and I filled it. Because children do that. They fill the gap. And then you pointed at the way I'd filled it and said, 'See, she doesn't need us.' I paused. I needed you. I needed you 100 times when I was little, and you were busy being proud of how well I managed without you." My mom made a sound, something wet and shaky. I looked at her. "That's not going to work on me tonight." I looked at my brother last. He had the grace to look uncomfortable, which was more than I had expected. I don't blame you, I told him, and I meant it. They did this to you too, just in the other direction. They made you believe the world would keep filling in whatever you needed. It won't. And I genuinely hope you figure that out before it costs you everything. He said nothing, but he wasn't smiling anymore. I picked up my purse. Daniel told you Friday. I would take that seriously. I looked at my dad one last time. After the money comes back, I need you to not contact me for a while. I'll reach out when I'm ready, if I'm ready. But the calls, the texts, the check-ins where you make sure I'm still fine, I need that to stop. I'm not your emotional insurance policy anymore. We walked out of the house. The night air was cold and clean, and I breathed it in like I'd been underwater. Daniel didn't say anything for a while. We got in the truck, and he started driving, and I watched the neighborhood go by out the window, all the lit-up windows of other people's ordinary evenings. "How are you doing?" he asked finally. "I feel like I just put something down that I've been carrying since I was 7 years old," I said. He nodded slowly. "That sounds right. The money arrived that Thursday, not Thursday. 2 days early. The full amount plus 8%, more than it would have earned." The note in the transfer simply read, "For Claire." My dad called the same day. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was mostly about how much the family cared about me, and how he hoped we could all move forward, and how he'd love to take Daniel to lunch sometime, maybe talk about some opportunities he'd been thinking about. I didn't call back. My brother texted 3 times over the following 2 weeks. The first was an apology, genuine enough, though it included a line about how he really did believe in his business idea and hoped I'd give him a chance to explain it sometime. The second was asking if Daniel's company ever used outside consultants. The third was a meme, a pivot, a peace offering, the way he'd always tried to smooth things over with humor. I read them and I put my phone down and I went back to my life. My mom sent a card to our apartment. Inside, she had written a long note about how she hoped I understood that everything they'd ever done was out of love, and that families went through hard patches, and that she was there whenever I was ready. She included a photo from when I was about 4 years old, sitting on a kitchen counter, apparently laughing at something, completely unself-conscious. On the back she'd written, "You were always such a happy girl." I held that photo for a long time. I wasn't angry at it. I felt a quiet sadness. For that 4-year-old, for the version of my mom who probably did love me the best way she knew how. For all the distance between loving someone and making them feel loved. I put the photo in a drawer and I let myself sit with the complicated grief of it, and then I got up and made dinner. Daniel and I got married the following June. We kept it small, 40 people, a restored barn outside the city, string lights and wildflowers and the best food we'd eaten in our lives. No formal wedding party. My best friend from college stood beside me. Daniel's brother, who I had come to love, stood beside me. Daniel's brother, who I had come to love, stood beside him. We did not invite my parents. We did not invite my brother. I had unblocked my mom 2 weeks before the wedding in case of a real emergency. She figured out the date through someone tangentially connected to our lives and sent a message the morning of that said, "I hope you're happy today, Claire. I hope you know we love you." I read it at the barn while my friend was doing my hair. I thought about it for about 30 seconds. Then I put my phone in my bag and I went outside and I stood in the morning light looking at the wild flowers someone had arranged along the fence posts. And I thought about my grandmother. I thought about her voice, the specific way she said my name. I thought about what she told me. Every woman should have something that's hers alone. I thought she would have liked Daniel. I thought she would have been very pleased. The ceremony was short and full of laughter. We'd written our own vows, which turned out to be funnier than expected, and also, apparently, made half of the 40 people cry. When Daniel said, "I want you to know that the version of you that existed before I met you, the one who fought for everything alone, who never asked for help, who was so used to being told she was fine that she almost believed it, that person deserved so much more than she got. And I planned to make up for every single year of it. I lost it completely. I had planned to be composed. I was not composed. It was perfect. We spent our honeymoon driving the coast of Oregon, staying in small towns, eating at local diners, watching the ocean from headlands. No agenda. Just the two of us, and the road and the feeling of something enormous and heavy having been officially, permanently set down. That fall, I put the money, my grandmother's money, towards something I'd been thinking about for a long time. I knew I couldn't keep it untouched forever. It had sat in that account like a clean thing, and I didn't want to use it for anything with my family's fingerprints on it. Our house down payment came from us, from what we built together. That was ours. The $28,000 I used to fund something else. A small nonprofit, technically, a support organization for young women aging out of the foster care system in our county. Women who were 18, 19, 20 years old and suddenly on their own without any safety net at all. Who needed help navigating leases and credit and job applications and the 100 practical things nobody had ever taught them. Who needed someone to show up. I called it the Grounded Fund. Daniel thought that was a good name. My grandmother, I think, would have approved. I run it part-time alongside my regular job. We have 3 full-time staff now, and a board I'm proud of. Every time a young woman signs a lease on her first apartment, I remember being 23 and checking that savings account balance and thinking, at least there's this. At least there's something. I want them to have something. I heard about my family in pieces over the following years, the way you hear about people who used to be in your life. My brother's real estate venture did not work out. It lasted 11 months, burned through the money, and left my parents with a tangle of debt they were still working through. My brother moved back home. My mom told a mutual acquaintance that it had been an incredibly difficult year. I felt something when I heard that. Not satisfaction exactly. Something more tired than that. The sadness of watching people who had the option to build something real choose, over and over again, to build theater instead. My dad reached out once, 18 months after the wedding. A brief email. He said he'd been doing some reflecting. He said he knew there were things he should have done differently. He said he hoped I was well. I wrote back 3 sentences. I said I was well. I said I was glad he was reflecting. I said I was glad he was reflecting. I said I would be in touch if I wanted to have a conversation. I haven't emailed again yet. Maybe I will someday. Maybe the anger will finish cooling down into something more workable. I've learned not to force the timeline on that. What I know is this. I wasted years waiting for my family to see me. Years shrinking, absorbing, accepting less than I deserved, because I had been taught that my capacity to handle things was a reason to keep handing me more to handle. The word they used was capable. What they meant was convenient. I am capable. That's true, but it was never the compliment they thought it was. Capable means I can do hard things. It doesn't mean hard things should be the only thing on the menu. Daniel made me understand that, not by telling me, by just existing beside me in a way that demonstrated it, by being the first person in my life who looked at my strength and thought that's incredible instead of that's useful. We have a house now, with a yard that is mostly dirt because we have enormous plans and very little time to execute them. We have a dog named Franklin who takes up 3/4 of the bed. I have a job I'm good at and a project I love, and a husband who makes me laugh every single day. I have a life that is mine. Built piece by piece. Nothing borrowed, nothing owed. My grandmother told me every woman should have something that's hers alone. I finally understood what she meant. She wasn't talking about the money.